Welcome back to Small Sailboat, Big Water. This is a comprehensive video. Here's a table of contents so you can navigate to exactly what you want. This boat has a depth of tradition, the likes of which I've never seen in a production sailboat, so prepare to dive. Forged in the icy grip of Canada's wild waters, this small sailboat was built long ago and is battle-tested. If it can survive the ruthless cold and relentless seas of the Great White North, everything else will just be a beam reach on a calm day. Stay tuned as we break the ice and uncover the most adventure-inspiring small sailboat design I've ever seen. The Nordica 16 and 20, the Danica 16, the Halman 20, the designers, the builders, and other related boats. Once there was a time when boats were crafted solely by artisans, shaped without blueprints. Rather, they are guided by the wisdom of generations. They understood the sea's challenges and the potential of the wood they crafted. Each vessel symbolizing the bond between humanity and nature, carrying the legacy of those who navigated its waters into the unknown. To fully appreciate the Nordica and its extended family of sailboats, all with strong resemblance, we must trace its bloodline. So we travel to an old Danish fishing village, 200 miles to the west of Copenhagen, named Lynaes. Protected by high cliffs, this town sits on the shore of the ice fjord, which is connected to the Sailboat, which is a bay that will take you out to the North Sea. This story begins in the aftermath of the Great Storm of 1850. It was on February 5th, coming in off the North Atlantic, an unexpected storm, packing hurricane-force winds, barreled in, catching fishermen in its path and off guard, sinking the bulk of the fishing fleet and extinguishing many lives. Like tales told before, it's a terrible storm that stirs the waters of history. And fate just has a way of pairing the man with the moment. Entering the scene is Danish master shipwright and pilot, Ole Jensen. Mr. Jensen had become well known for building a much beloved and seaworthy sailing dinghy, which was noted for its generous beam and round stern, and it had roots that went back to 1820. It was built entirely of oak and it had a dagger board for shallow water. It was primarily used for small-scale fishing and bird hunting. After the storm, there was a high demand for boats, so Mr. Jensen started building a series of fishing boats based on his dinghy design, and soon he replaced what was lost in the storm. Ole Jensen had an apprentice named Peter Madsen, whose mad skills carried on the tradition. And then Peter passed along the craft of building these beautiful wooden boats to his son, Christian. And without drawings or frame lines, he drew only upon his sharp instincts and talent and accumulated wisdom. Christian got straight to work building boats using this time-honored method. By the year 1860, they had managed to build 700 or 800 of these boats. But production got so expensive, and it was very hard to find good, experienced boat builders. So business slowed, but in the 1960s, production took off again with the development of fiberglass boat building techniques. The Lynaes factory built several hundred of the fiberglass version of the Lynaes 14. Christian Madsen found himself in high demand by other boat builders as an advisor as they were making the switch as the fiberglass revolution began. The design found its way across the pond and into the hands of a Canadian manufacturer named Oostzee Fibercraft, located in Exeter, Ontario, Canada. West of Toronto, a mere 12 miles from the southeast corner of Lake Huron. This Canadian town is further south than the northern border of 15 U.S. states. Beginning in the year 1975, the Oostzee Fibercraft Company Limited created the Nordica 16 as well as the 20. They began building the Nordica 29 in 1980. The 30 model just accounts for the addition of a bowsprit, which makes the boat 33 foot long. It's kind of funny. Sailboat manufacturers tend to be really free-spirited about their numbers, and I find a lot of discrepancies. If you disagree with one of my numbers, it might be me just trying to decide which one of these numbers is coming from the most legitimate source. And there can be variations in the same factory production run, especially in the reported sail area, the ballast, the type of port bites, and other upgrades. You'll often notice the adage, in some models, some of which is due to dealer request. We'll get into that in a minute. When referring to the length of a sailboat, there's 3 different numbers you need to know. There's the load water line, and that's the length of the water line as the boat is floating on the water, which sometimes differs from the designed water line, which is the water line the designer intended the boat to float on. Next is the length overall, which is the minimal measurement possible from the bow of the boat to the stern when leasing boat slips or hauling out. But it's also possible to grow your boat by including the bowsprit all the way back to the rudder head or possibly a mizzen boom. It's not lying, it's just how it's done. The lowest possible number, and the number that the Flicka 20 likes to call herself, is length over deck, which is 20 foot, and then you add on a 3 or 4 foot long bowsprit and a big old rudder on the back, and you're pushing 24 foot length overall. Sailboat manufacturing is not like automobile manufacturing. Things get a little fishy. I was reading about how some, specifically the early Nordica models, were produced without any embedded hull numbers. I don't know how things work for our friends up north, but down here in the States, every boat produced needs to have an HIN number. That's a hull identification number, which is an alphanumeric identifier. I also learned that after Oostzee Fibercraft ceased production, the molds were utilized by the Ontario-based Air Scoops Corporation, which produced an unknown number of Nordicas. The Oostzee Fibercraft manufacturer identification code is ZEX, just in case you do find a number. Alright, now let's investigate the boat that kicked everything into gear, their flagship, the Nordica 16. The design credit is given to Ole Jensen, but I bet you Nordica's designer B. Malta Mueller also had a hand in it. This uniquely designed cuddy cabin sailboat sits atop a full fiberglass encapsulated keel that holds between 400 and 450 pounds of clippings from a nearby nail factory mixed with concrete, giving her a ballast to displacement ratio of around 43%. This sailboat features a thick, hand-laid fiberglass hull. It was created in 2 sections, 2 molds that were joined together at a seam along the keel. I haven't read a single report about this seam separating, but I have seen where some neglected models have developed a horizontal crack along the keel, likely due to water seeping down into the concrete ballast and rusting out the iron, or possibly expanding and trying to break free of its fiberglass encapsulation. A great upgrade to this boat would be to bust out all that old concrete and rusted metal and then replace it with lead encapsulated in resin. And some people have been increasing the ballast of these boats. Skippers feel safe sailing this boat because it will heal to 20-25 degrees and then find its stability. As you might suspect, opinions on this boat vary, but everyone seems to agree that it tracks well. With its long keel, there's low drift as it holds a steady course, and it's easy to heave to. It came standard with a fiberglass rudder that was hung from the transom as well as the keel. The length of the waterline is 13 foot 10 inches. The length overall is 15 foot 6 inches. It has a 6 foot 2 inch beam and a 20-inch draft. It has a reported displacement of 925 pounds, which is about 15% lighter than the Com-Pac 16 and nearly 20% heavier than the Montgomery 15, just to give you a comparison. The Nordica 16's hull has a pounds per inch immersion number of 288 to 300, which is the pounds of weight it takes to sink the hull 1 inch, which is a good number to know when you're loading a boat with such low freeboard. This boat was designed to sit in the water as opposed to on top of it, making it less affected by waves and giving it a slower upward motion. But all that wetted surface makes it a pig in light air, and you might need to back the jib to tack it, bust out the biggest Genoa in light air, or you might need to fire up that British Seagull. Some people consider this boat a motor sailor, but described as swift and a moderate to strong wind. It's been given a theoretical hull speed of 5 knots. Its reported sail area of 130 to 140 square feet is flown from her fractionally rigged 21-foot-long hinged deck-stepped mast, which is held up by a forestay and, I don't see a backstay, and 4 shrouds, which run down to chain plates that pass through the deck, presumably to bulkheads. I also see Nordica 16s with exterior chain plates mounted directly to the hull. There's not a lot of information saying which builder, XE Fibercraft or the Air Scoops Corporation, where they located their chain plates, or possibly private owners have relocated their chain plates from being internal to external, attached to the hull, maybe to avoid deck leaks or just to make the whole rig stronger. I just don't know. Leave me a comment. Hit the like and subscribe button while you're at it, because I'm trying to make videos the old-fashioned way like your grandpappy did. Really, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. It looks like the Dutch version, the MG, only has 2 shrouds. Stick around till the end of this video and we'll head back to the Kingdom of Denmark and talk about the Dutch version of this boat called the Oostzee Jol. The Nordica 16 brochure claims that the boat is self-righting, but I've also read an account to the contrary. With its moderate amount of canvas and its considerable amount of ballast, I wouldn't see capsizing as a problem. I gathered somewhere that balsa had been used to core the deck forward of the cabin and 1/4-inch plywood for the rest of the deck. Deck rot is something you really have to look out for. These boats simply weren't built to the same high standards of some other sailboat manufacturers. With some modifications and improvements in the fit and finish, I've seen restored models not only revived, but refined. What Nordicas are known for is a strong, thick hull with extra layers of fiberglass to increase its resistance to sudden impacts and the relentless pounding of the sea, which of course makes it heavier and costs you maneuverability and speed. The deck was joined to the hull in various ways. I've read reports of people replacing broken rivets. Some people have found screws, and some models were factory fiberglass together. The factory variations on these Nordicas truly make them a box of chocolates. But hold on, there's more. We haven't talked about the big elephant in the cockpit. Now, before you start slamming the Nordica 16 and harshen my mellow, remember, this old Jensen design was based on a boat from the year 1820. The lines came from a working sailing dinghy, and it had to sit low in the water to retain its stability, while at the same time it needed a deep cockpit to hold all their fishing gear, designed with a high bow for big head waves. And this beautiful sweeping shear line allowed them an extra low freeboard that made it easy to row this boat with some oars, or to pull a heavy net full of fish onto deck. This boat sits so low in the water, a self-bailing cockpit is a luxury the designer couldn't afford. There's many considerations when buying one of these boats, but this is number one. To alleviate this problem, owners have installed a small automatic bilge pump located under a grate in the cockpit. The only eternal way to transcend this perpetual burden is to raise the cockpit sole. Recognizing this problem, Oostzee Fibercraft included a cockpit cover as standard equipment. They also offered a deluxe model of the Nordica 16, which included more color options, navigation lights, a Genoa, and a bow pulpit. The standard color for the Oostzee Fibercraft Nordica 16 was an ivory hull with an ivory and maroon non-skid deck. The cockpit is big enough for 2 people, which would be about the maximum weight you'd want for a 1,000-pound displacement double-ender. You lose some aft buoyancy with a canoe stern. Alright, now let's climb down below, check out the cabin. Designed like an offshore micro-cruiser, it wasn't built with a sliding companionway hatch. This is truly a cuddy cabin. Oostzee Fibercraft was not exactly a Florida-based boat builder. It was built more for heat retention than ventilation. But later models, you could get this boat with 2 opening bronze port lights, and then came 4. And there's seated headroom on the 6-foot 8-inch bunks. Positive flotation was also installed from the factory throughout the boat, but over the decades it absorbs moisture, gets heavy, and should be removed. The foam flotation probably should be reinstalled, but this time it should be done with the spray foam in a bag method. That way, pieces can be removed and dried as necessary. Well, that seems to be about everything I can think to tell you about the Nordica 16. The good, the bad, and now let's find out how it was made better. A guy by the name of Peter Hahn bought a Nordica 16, and he had some big sailing aspirations, and he needed a boat that was just a little better. Very similar to the Nordica 16, he decided to come up with his own boat. He named it the Danica. He thought the boat deserved a name that paid more homage to its Danish heritage. Peter Hahn's Vancouver-based sailboat shop only produced 25 of these Danica 16s, making you one of a select few if you own one. Some sailboats are designed to sail quickly in circles, with long fin keels, and they're great sailing upwind and snappy tackers. But with their flat, semi-planing hulls, you just get pounded by the waves. But these little boats put the ride and the crew comfort at priority. Some believe that the Danica 16 is just a modified Nordica 16, but it's really not. Unlike the Nordica's hull, being molded in 2 sections, the Danica's hull emerged from its form in one solid mass. And the leading edge of the Danica's keel is wider and was built with more fiberglass reinforcement to handle hard, rocky groundings. And the Danica's keel is 4 to 8 inches deeper than the Nordica's, depending where you measure from. To address the Nordica 16's glaring issue, designer Peter Hahn increased the shear height by nearly 4 inches. He increased the height of the cockpit coaming, which allowed him to increase the height of the cockpit sole. Now he had a sailboat with a cockpit that could drain, and it did so through a drain at the rear of the cockpit. Then it traveled through a hose to a below-the-waterline through-hull. Apparently, the cockpit drain hose is very hard to access. I read about a guy who just gave up on trying to replace a hose and just glassed over the outlet, with Peter Hahn somewhere just shaking his head. The Danicas have a smaller, more offshore-style cockpit with the addition of a lazarette. A few Danica models have taken full advantage of this lazarette space and have made modifications to the keel, the hull, and the rudder to make room for an outboard motor well. Not really well received in an age of 2-cycle outboard motors, complaints of smoke in the cabin, but nowadays with a cleaner burning 4-stroke or possibly electric motor, I would love to have this as an option. Early Danicas have large plexiglass rectangular windows. Later models have nice bronze opening port lights. Peter found a deal at an auction. Usually 2 port lights in this boat, but again, sometimes 4. Are any 2 Danicas built the same? I don't know. I doubt it. The Danica is most easily distinguished from its Nordica cousin by its 4 3/4 inch taller cabin, which now had a sliding main hatch, which was the perfect companion to the new bridge deck. A rare few of these Danicas were designed with galleys that offered a small sink, an icebox, and a space for a stove, as well as additional storage lockers, which he had filled with additional foam flotation, now making his Danica 100% unsinkable. So now, Peter Hahn had the boat that he always wanted, and he was ready to take the trip that he always wanted to make. So he took off, and he sailed his Danica 16 from Vancouver to Hawaii. He was attempting to set the record for the smallest boat to make the trip, but he was beaten by someone who made the journey in an 11-foot boat. It would be interesting to know where Peter Hahn's life went from there, but that's where the trail goes cold. So, how about we fly back to Exeter, Ontario, and let's delve into the XE fibercraft Nordica 20. Designed by B. Malta Mueller, who was from Denmark and also thought to have designed the Lynaes Senior. This full keel hull was also molded in 2 halves and then bonded together. It's my understanding that this method of split mold construction gave the worker better access to the hull so that they could do a superior job with the hand layup. The thin 3-inch wide keel made access difficult. These Nordicas are known for thick hulls and for being very safe and comfortable in rough conditions. Built to withstand possible hard groundings. Some even have a metal keel protecting strip running along the forward edge of the keel. The length overall is 19.5 feet, 16.5 feet at the waterline with a 7-foot 8-inch beam. She weighs in at 2,520 pounds, 1,020 pounds of which is ballast, which comes to 40.48%. It's got a water draft of 3.25 feet, which is the exact same as the Flicka 20, but that's where the similarities between these 2 boats ends. Very interesting how these 2 boats of seemingly similar proportions have been designed to displace the water in such a dissimilar way. But that's a whole nother video. The Nordica 20 also has a transom and keel-mounted rudder that is controlled by a tiller. This mast-headed sloop has an air draft of 30 feet and a reported sail area of 188 square feet, which was accompanied by the auxiliary power of a Renault or BMW 7-horsepower diesel with a 7-gallon fuel tank. Other diesel options were also available between 4 and 10 horsepower. The inboard diesel is a highly recommended option for this boat. It's a common problem for sailboats with outboard motors to have the motor going from being nearly swamped to the propeller rising out of the water and ventilating badly. For me, it's a big problem on my Com-Pac 23. In one of my videos, I actually turn around and chicken out from going out on Galveston Bay because I know my boat's limitations. Sailboats featuring an extreme shear line are susceptible to the rocking chair effect, which causes the stern to lift and dip significantly. It's amplified on a double ender. Canoe sterns naturally have less reserve buoyancy than a boat with its beam carried aft. But do you really want to share a small cuddy cabin with a diesel engine? The only solution for this boat really seems to be the outboard motor in a well. This tiny offshore style cockpit's described as being deep, comfortable, and dry. The cockpit is small, but without a main sheet or a tiller in the way, all the space is usable. It will shed more and hold less water from a breaking wave. than the conventional sized cockpit, and it also keeps the aft crew weight to a minimum, which will help to preserve the designed hull trim. But however it was pushed, the hull speed is 5.4 knots. The Nordica 20's deck is cored with plywood, and due to the age of these boats, deck rot is a common problem. But the deck's multiple angles and lack of large flat areas keep it strong. The hull-to-deck joint is an outward flange, which I've read about being joined together by rivets, bolts, or fiberglass, with sealant in between. Similar to its little brother, the Nordica 16, this boat tracks well, but some people also have difficulty getting it to tack in light air. But it's easy enough to back the jib to help bring the bow over. Stepping down below, we notice its ample 60-inch headroom, which was accomplished by the use of a footwell. And beneath that, we find its 1,020-pound ballast, which I learned is loose and it can be removed by hand with a bucket or a powerful shop vac. It just seems so strange to me. I've never seen loose ballast on a small production sailboat before. But now these boats are over 40 years old, it's kind of nice to be able to remove it so easy, to replace it with some prefabricated lead. I'm not sure if the ballast on all Nordica 20s is loose, or if this is just another Nordica anomaly.
Sorry.
Keep your flashy sailboat. I want simple and tough. Keep your floating condo and your maintenance fees. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I go alone, and the less moving parts, the better. I want the cabin in the woods, solid shelter in a storm, and not much else. It was back in the year 1977 when a guy named Richard Navin took over Nordica and started building his Nordic Hallman 20. He worked alongside a guy named Michael Vollmore, who was the designer and CEO. Richard Navin liked the Nordica 20 so much he bought the company, but he wanted it a little better, more powerfully built. Not just a development of the Nordica 20, this boat had all new tooling. Instead of the hull being molded in two halves and bonded together, the Hallman was designed to be wider so it could be manufactured in one piece. Instead of a full keel, the Hallman has a cutaway forefoot for better tacking. The leading edge of the keel, the Hallman 20, is not only wider than the Nordica 20, but it's also more reinforced with a bashing plate. The Nordica 20 is known for slightly better upwind performance and more comfortable ride in heavy seas with its full keel. Heading topside, we notice the doghouse has been raised by 6 inches for more headroom, and the cabin is larger at the expense of cockpit space. You also got higher quality spars. This masthead sloop has a 30-foot air draft. This 25-foot, 6¼ inch mast is deck stepped on a balsa cord deck and smartly ran down to exterior chain plates. These boats commonly came with a 6 to 8 horsepower inboard diesel. 10% of them came with the optional single-cylinder 9 horsepower Yanmar 1GM10 diesel. Stepping down below, we see that full advantage was taken of the wider keel with the use of a stepwell. People have been known to remove the 1,000-pound ballast, loose in some cases, encased in concrete in other cases, and then replace it with even more ballast of pure lead, which allows you to lower the center of gravity while you raise the headroom or the amount of storage. One day, a U.S. dealer placed an order for 20 Hallman 20s, but he wanted these boats to be outfitted better. The dealer requested that these boats have the addition of a bowsprit to give it more sail area for better light air performance. The dealer also demanded a higher standard of finish, and he wanted all 6 port lights to be bronze, an opening. He also wanted bronze winches and cleats. And so our story comes full circle. What began in the Netherlands with its rich seafaring tradition made its way across the Atlantic, found new life in Canada, and now we return to the waters that inspired it. A fitting journey for a sailboat born from a nation of sailors. The Oostzee Jol, also known as the MG-15, is a compact sailboat that's also double-ended and has a long keel. It was originally built by the Dutch company Polymor. It's the direct descendant of the Lynaes 14. Polymor also produced an open version called the Visserman version. After the Polymor company closed down, the molds were sold to Marfridge Yachting, and they produced the boat in 2 versions, the standard version and the higher version. Similar to the Danica, the higher version had a nearly 4-inch higher shear line, and it had a raised cabin top, which was higher by 4 3/4 inch. What makes the Oostzee, the MG-15 version of this boat, my favorite is the factory-installed outboard motor well. Well, that's it for this episode. The wind is just right to sail right out of here, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.